Good morning. Welcome to Watershed. We're so glad that you are here, both in person and out in the online world, or maybe you're sitting outside. I think we got a little bit of overcast weather, which might be nice. Want to welcome you in. Want to invite you to stand with us this morning. We put a couple of more chairs out. We've been kind of packing the house a little bit. I want to give you some room to maybe social distance if you'd like to do that. But I want to invite you to stand as we sing together this morning.
I will trust in you and know that you are with me forever. I'll confide in you, 'cause you're the only answer that matters. Even in the darkness, you will be my light. Even when I'm hopeless, you will be my guide. I will not be shaken, I will not be moved. Even in the chaos, I know that you're good. Sing, you're the keeper. You're the keeper, protector. It is you that holds us together when everything else failed us. It is you that holds us together. Sing, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Your thoughts and plans of me, they are good. And I will wait on you. I know that you will see. Even in the darkness, you will be my light. Even when I'm hopeless, you will be my guide. I will not be shaken, I will not be moved. Even in the chaos, I know that you're good. You're the keeper, protector. It is you that holds us together. Everything else failed us. It is you that holds us together. So you're the keeper, protector. It is you that holds us together. Everything else failed us. It is you that holds us together.
I've been held in your hands from the moment that I wake up until I lay my head. I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful.
You all figured it out. You can have a seat. Fun fact. My name is David, by the way. Hello. Fun fact, I caffeinate heavily in the morning on Sunday just on the off chance that I might have to follow Tyler. My energy level typically tops out at a 6 on a 10 scale. So that 32 ounces of caffeine in the morning, well, a drink, 32 ounces of a drink, that'd be a lot. The caffeine in the morning gets me up to about a 7.5, so lucky you. Welcome. This is cool. We added like 3 times the chairs, and you guys are spreading out well. That's why we did it. We wanted you to be able to spread out. On that note, by the way, as people are coming in, kind of rolling in, feel free to slide towards the middle if that's helpful to anyone, so that it'll be easier for people coming in to find open seats. But for hopefully obvious reasons, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for you all to get comfortable, but also spread out so we're not all tightly lumped together and whatnot. But anyway, I am badly meandering already, so that's the caffeine as well. Couple things that we want to draw your attention to this morning. First and foremost is actually right down the hall in our greenhouse space, which is our children's area, birth through 5th grade. Yeah, I'm the middle school pastor. I should know when my area starts. But yeah, birth through 5th grade. We are currently recruiting soil mates. Do you get it? Because it's greenhouse and soil. Yeah. Very clever, Blair. Very clever. But what is a soil mate? Well, hopefully it's you. If you're not currently serving with me in some area, I don't want to lose you. But if you're not, feel free to sign up to be a soil mate. You can see on the screen there, we have lots of different roles in the greenhouse space, lots of different manifestations of soil mate. Dream team member, experience director, greenhouse teacher, classroom cultivator, substitute cultivator. I think a lot of you are going to really like that one. And greenhouse prep team. So all of these are ongoing areas of need. They are wonderful. I'm a little biased because my own daughters are in the greenhouse space, but you get to hang out with adorable children, hear them kind of pontificate about faith and spirituality, which is significantly more profound than anything that you will hear me or my fellow teaching team members say on a Sunday morning. And so if that sounds even remotely not terrifying to you, then I highly recommend, at the very least, you get to hang out with Blair for like 30 to 60 minutes as she pitches you on it, and Blair is lovely and a lot of fun, and you'll probably get free coffee out of it. So please, if you have any interest at all, there's going to be a spot on our Watershed app where you can express interest, or you can email Blair, B-L-A-I-R, at watershed.charlotte.com, and she'd be happy to set you up. Additionally, we have 2 environments. I don't know why. Does anyone do that? Yeah, 2 environments in the next couple of weeks, month or so, that allow you to plug in more deeply here if you're looking for an opportunity to do that. The first is Preface 1.0. We have to differentiate now because we have Preface 2.0, which is ongoing at the moment. But the next Preface 1.0 experience is going to be kicking off mid-September. The app has the exact date for sure, but mid-September. And really, Preface is if you're looking for not the only, but maybe the perfect or the ideal place if you're new or have been coming to Watershed a little bit for a few weeks, few months now, and kind of are looking, all right, I've got my feet wet. These people haven't scared me off yet. They have coffee, again, so that's exciting. I want to get more plugged in. Go to Preface. It's going to be a 3-week experience, still fully digital on Zoom, totally free. We don't charge for that. And you get to hang out with Matt O'Neill, one of our co-pastors. Scott Hofert, our other co-pastor, is also often there. I sometimes show up. Other staff and leaders sometimes show up. And it's just kind of an opportunity to hear a little bit about the story of Watershed, the spiritual journey that we've been on over the last 15 some odd years, and then an opportunity for you to share your own spiritual journey and hopefully see the ways where those might intersect, as well as getting a lot of basic questions about what Watershed is and why it exists answered for you. So that's coming up, and then confusingly, because I chose to talk about Preface first, before Preface happens in September, the next reclamation block is kicking off Wednesday, August 18th. If you think you like me, you should sign up for Reclamation because you're going to get a lot of me in Reclamation. It's a 4-week digital experience where I talk a lot and tell you about things related to spirituality. As you can kind of see in the name, we are reclaiming kind of some big ideas that maybe meant something for us at a certain stage in our spiritual journey and now mean something different for us now, or could mean something different for us now. Maybe they don't mean anything at all. So in the past, we've reclaimed things like God, kind of a big one, sin and salvation. And this August, we're going to be tackling what is God for some people, the Bible. We are going to be reclaiming the Bible, or at least that's my ambitious goal over 4 weeks. So if that sounds fun or kind of transgressive and scary to you, you should totally sign up. It's free, like I said, Wednesday evenings, Zoom, 7 p.m. It's going to be awesome. And I'm going to sneak in one more announcement, even though I'm already over my time, because I found out it was happening after we had already kind of settled on the announcements. But if you are a middle schooler or high schooler, or you know one, maybe you birthed one, then we have an event for middle school and high schoolers in 2 weekends. Saturday, August 7th, we're going to be doing a pool party, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., food provided, totally free. If you go to watershed.com/watershed-students, or just find the student section of the website, there's more information on that. So. And then lastly, before I get out of your hair, none of this would be possible without the ongoing just ownership and generosity of so many of you. And so it takes a decent amount of money to do a lot of the things that we do here at Watershed. And we know, conversations about giving and stuff like that can sometimes be awkward in church spaces. So we kind of just want to name it and throw it out there that this all costs money. And so for those of you who continue to believe in us and partner with us, not only with your finances, but also with all of the ways that you serve, all of you soil mates out there and future soil mates, this takes a team, it takes a village, it takes all of us working together to kind of move the ball down the field, the rare Watershed sports reference. So thank you for those of you who continue to support us in that way. And for those of you maybe looking to do that safely and securely, we have the app. We have sections on our website that allow you to give securely and also kind of unpack where that money is going and how it's being stewarded. And then finally, for you old school types, we do have some metal boxes in the back if you still write physical checks. That'd be fascinating, but some of you do. So that's it for me. Thank you all for being here. I will catch you later.
Well, good morning, Watershed. My name's Keith, and like our friend David, I too have drank about 32 ounces of caffeine. But unlike David, I still feel like I'm about a 3.5. So bear with me. So I've been coming to Watershed for about the past couple years now. I'm actually a practicing Buddhist, so this is the first church that I've gone to since childhood. I didn't expect to find myself a member of a church, but I really like the vibe here and feel very welcome and comfortable at Watershed, so thanks for having me this morning. So what's saving me? What a great question to contemplate, right? A number of things come to mind when I ask myself this question. It's really no single one thing in particular. I got sober about 15 months ago and would truly be remiss not to acknowledge that sobriety has saved me from a life of being controlled by alcohol. The fellowship of AA, the guidance of my sponsor, the loving support and encouragement of my wife, Melissa, and my 2 daughters, Phoebe and Ursula, are all a part of what's saving me today and helping me to live my best life, to be the best version of myself that I can be, one day at a time. But when I think about what's saving me today, what has been keeping me sane during the pandemic this past year, I have to say it's my daily bike rides. You see, I start each day with prayer and meditation, and then I typically get on my bike and ride for about an hour or so before I start my workday. I have a few different routes I've made up that I rotate through, all of which include stopping for coffee somewhere along route, at least 12 ounces. More if I stop twice. At one of my favorite coffee shops, of which there are many. Sometimes I'll meet up with a friend and we'll ride together and chat over coffee, but most days I simply ride solo, just enjoying the morning, the fresh morning air, the feel of the bike on the road and the wheels beneath my feet. I've always loved riding my bike since I was a little kid. It's one of the simple joys of life that I've never outgrown, thankfully. From the time I got my first hot cycle as a toddler, I would be on it first thing when I woke up in the morning, zooming around our kitchen table if it was wintertime. I grew up in Michigan. Or up and down the sidewalk in front of our house. I remember when I got my first 12-speed road bike and discovered I could cover a lot more ground with gears and 27-inch wheels. That's when I took up long-distance riding, and in the summertime, I would be gone for hours, literally. I'd just pack a lunch in my handlebar bag and take off. Sometimes a towel on the back of my bike, head for the beach, go swimming, whatever, just exploring the country roads beyond my hometown of Muskegon and just feeling the freedom that comes with just traveling by bicycle. I guess that sense of freedom and independence still comes back every time I get on my bike. That association is still there. So even if it's just a short morning coffee ride or a jaunt around Charlotte, I still get that happy, excited feeling like I'm a kid again. All my senses come alive as I meander down one street after another, often deciding impromptu where I want to go, exploring places I've never been before, or riding old familiar streets and greenways and watching them change over time. My morning rides are an opportunity for me to clear my head, get some endorphins pumping in my brain, some fresh air in my lungs, and a bit of exercise. During the pandemic, it was one of the few opportunities I had to safely meet up and socialize with friends, not to mention just to get out of the house and have a change of scenery while working from home. On the weekends, I like to go for longer rides and will usually hit the trails with my mountain bike. I was a late bloomer to trail riding. I didn't get my first mountain bike until I turned 40. Part of my midlife crisis, I guess. I test rode one at the recyclery and was like, wow, this is so much fun. I feel like I could ride over anything. And sometimes I do and crash. So I can't, maybe the bike can. Trail riding, it reminds me of being a kid again, riding my BMX bike, just the fun and the thrill of it. It's also another way for me to be out in the woods with my friends. And I think what it boils down to is just this feeling connected to something greater than myself. That mixture of joy and serenity I get when I'm in nature. In early sobriety, I often found myself going on 2 bike rides a day, before and after work. It was a way for me to fill my time when I was feeling restless and irritable. It became a healthy substitute for drinking. It was a way for me to divert my attention from wanting to drink and put my restless energy into something positive instead of numbing myself to feelings that make me uncomfortable. So now, instead of running away from my feelings, I take them on a bike ride and convert that energy to pedal power. And now I would like to ask each of you to think about what is saving you today.
We've done this segment, this What's Saving You segment for, I think, a few years now. And it's interesting, the different responses that have come up. But we're going to do a song that kind of encapsulates a little bit of that, maybe that feeling. The feeling that Keith mentioned, that there's something bigger than us that holds us together. And sometimes those things are being out in nature. Sometimes it's a person. And I think we all are searching for it. We're all looking for it. We're all trying to find it in different ways at different times. Sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's unhealthy. But this song, it's called Brother, and I am lucky enough to share the stage with my brother over on the far left. And at different points in our relationship and our lives, we have been that for each other. And I know that That's different for everybody. But as we sing this song, maybe you're in a spot where you are feeling like there is something that's saving you. Maybe you're in a spot where you're searching for it and you feel like there's nothing saving you. Maybe you got the email from Taryn asking you if you could share and you're like, no, there's nothing saving me right now. And that's okay. It's okay to be in that spot. It's okay to show up in that spot. Take these next few moments. Who or what is your brother? That spot for you that you're longing for, that's bigger than you, that can hold you and care for you. I'll never leave you all alone. I can be the one you call when you're low. Brother, let me be your fortress. The night winds are driving on. Be the one to light your way. Bring you one to light your way.
The stories of Ruth and Esther.
The way that Paul conceives of original sin and salvation in 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Laws on sexual immorality. Because, we got a bunch of freaks in Watershed that need to get their act together.
The parable of the vineyard owner, Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16.
Jonah and the whale. Big fish. Whale?
In John 14, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. What does that even mean?
My name is Matt, and I'm one of the co-pastors here at Watershed, one of the teaching team members. And, when I watch that promo video and realize that I'm after Cedric, how anticlimactic it might feel to be listening to me speak right now, but we'll do the best we can. Here's how I want to begin this morning's conversation, I suppose. I want to begin with a quote from a guy named Pete Enns from a book called The Sin of Certainty and Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Beliefs. And Enns writes that doubt means spiritual relocation is happening. It's God's way of saying, time to move on. I think part of what happens for someone when they arrive here at Watershed, and what has consistently happened throughout the last 16 years, is the experience, the project of relocation. The recognition that whatever used to be, for a ton of different reasons, just doesn't seem to be working like we had hoped it would, spiritually, theologically. And then now it's time to move on, but then to what end? Like, what are we moving on to? And probably one of the hinge pins of that process is the Bible itself. And so it was probably about 3 months ago, as a teaching team, we sat around a table and said, what if we tried to help our community engage their own relocation project? And the way that we did that was we showed up and we talked about what that's been like for ourselves. And we began to describe this through some idea found in the scriptures or from our past, or maybe it's a story or a parable. In fact, last weekend, David dove into that idea through the reclamation of sin and original sin and salvation through a passage in Corinthians. And by the way, I've been doing this now for about 16 years, and every so often someone will stand up and say something, and it will just rock my world. Last weekend was one of those weekends. If you haven't had a chance to hear what was said here last weekend, please go to YouTube, go to Facebook, go to our website, and dial into what was said here last weekend. David did an incredible job. In fact, can you give him a round of applause, because that was just so good last weekend. There is no way I can live up to that bar this morning, but I want to try, and in doing so, I want to examine something that Jesus described in a parable in Matthew chapter 20. Maybe you're familiar with this parable. Jesus begins by equating the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God to this landowner who got up really early in the morning, and he travels to the local marketplace to try to recruit work so that his vineyards can continue to be manicured and groomed or cultivated or whatnot. And in some ways, nothing has changed, right? Like in that day and age, the marketplace is where you would go if you were looking to hire someone or if you were looking to find work. You went to this marketplace where there was some sort of bartering or exchange system, and then from there, all of the energy would take place. This still happens, right? In just about every city, major or minor, there's usually these sort of unofficial spaces where people will come and gather, usually at the beginning of daybreak, hoping to find work, right? Like when I drive into Watershed, sometimes I'll take a route that has me driving past Latrobe and Wendover. If you've ever been to that part of the city, there's a McDonald's there, and there's a food line kind of in a strip mall, and there's this space in between, and men and women will show up there, and they're just hoping that somehow they'll find work for the day. But the vineyard owner, he goes to the marketplace. That's the space in Jesus' day and age, and he chooses a few men to work, agrees to pay them a denarius, which is a day's worth of wages for labor. And they leave and they go back and they begin working in the vineyard. Around 9 a.m., this happens again. The vineyard owner returns, begins to recruit some more laborers. This time, he tells them, I will pay you whatever is right, which is a little scary sounding if you're the laborer, right? Like, what's your definition of right? I know what my definition of right is. But, it's 9 a.m. It's better to have an unfair wage than no wages at all, especially if you're trying to put food on the table. And so this group of people, they decide to go and they begin to engage in the work there. And there must have been quite a bit of work that day, because the vineyard owner returns again at noon, again at 3 p.m., and finally at 5 p.m., the last time that he recruits workers, except this time when he arrives, it's at the end of the day, and he asks a question. He asks, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? Why are you standing here? Now, I want to put a pin in that question, because there's a particular tone in which we read that verse at times, and I want to circle back to that in just a moment. But verse 7 says their response is, because no one has hired us. He said to them, okay, you also go and work in my vineyard. And so that's what happens. These folks, they leave with the vineyard owner, they go back, they go to the vineyard, and they begin engaging in the work. They're working alongside folks that have been there from the start of the day and throughout the various points of the day, and no one really thinks too much about it until the end of the day, when the vineyard owner says, okay, it's time to settle up everyone's account, call everybody together, we're going to pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. And this is where it gets a little wonky, right? The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a day's worth of wages. And so when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a day's worth of wages. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. They got pretty upset. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But the landowner answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius, a day's worth of labor, or wages rather? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? And Jesus ends this parable with the statement, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. Whew. Now, there is a whole bunch of stuff to cover here this morning. So I need you to kind of buckle your seatbelt, put on your helmet and your pads. I'm going to try to describe the way that this parable used to be read from my perspective and a way of reading it now that is completely different. When I was growing up in my quaint, precious little Southern Baptist church in the sticks of Kentucky, this parable was a part of a menu of parables that I would often hear. And I was told that this is really a story about what happens to you after you die. Like, this is about the grace and the forgiveness that's handed out so that people could go to heaven. And it doesn't, the point of the story and the time allotments is that it doesn't matter when you show up to the game. As long as you believe the right things before you take that last breath, you can be included in the great divine vineyard heaven thing in the sky, and you'll be safe. You'll be fine. And even if it's like on your deathbed, it's going to be okay. So if Grandpa prays on the deathbed and he was kind of a jerk his whole life, it's okay. You can sleep well at night. Like, that's literally how that was handed to me. And you shouldn't really care, because at the end of the day, like, God is God, and God is sovereign, and God can forgive or accept whoever God sees fit. So on the one hand, it was all about the power and the control and the sovereignty and the generosity of God. But sort of the implication of thinking that way was this individualism that began being rooted in the way that I understood spirituality and a life with God. In other words, this story became about a personal choice that someone would make, namely me. my personal decision, my personal relationship with Jesus, so that God's anger could somehow be thwarted and would garner this unrestrained acceptance, this forgiveness. And so at age 6, kneeling at my bed, I prayed this prayer so that I could escape hell. And many of you have been down that road. And so I would read this story, and I would be conditioned to kind of identify with someone based on where they showed up in the time allotment. And I certainly wasn't like a 9 a.m. person or a 6 a.m. person, in that worker time frame. Maybe I showed up at noon in my correct beliefs. Maybe it was 3 p.m. I definitely wasn't a 5 p.m.er, okay? I wasn't waiting until my last breath. And thank God that metaphor was there, because it saved me from feeling all of this angst around people that you just didn't know once they breathed their last step. So I could say a lot more about that and traumatize us this morning, but the point being that this story, part of why this story worked was because of my inness. Like, I already saw myself as being in. And so there wasn't any real motivation to think about this beyond what had already been handed to me. And yet, in my reflection back, and even in sort of the showing up to this story today, there's like this, if I'm really honest, there's like this twinge of something. It's like this residue of cynicism. The cynicism that says, okay, that's all fine and good for God, because God, clearly has unlimited resources of forgiveness and love and eternity and all that sort of thing. But let's be honest, like, if we rooted this story in the material world, this could never work, right? Like, a business owner who functioned this way in the material real world could never survive, right? Like, well, they might survive, but if the way of understanding the way that business and money works is to increase the bottom line, to maximize profit, like, can you imagine shareholders signing on to something like this? Probably not, right? At the very least, maybe you could survive, but probably you would go bankrupt. And not to mention, in the world, if the world really worked this way, at some point, wouldn't the workers like start taking advantage of what was being handed out? Like, why would you show up at the break of dawn when you could show up at 5 and still get the same pay? Isn't there some sort of addiction to the generosity of the landowner? And so, in his book, a guy named Miguel de la Torre, Reading the Bible from the Margins, kind of speaks into this. And he describes how, and it's a little lengthy, so bear with me here. He describes how in Europe, in the early 1600s, a new idea emerged out of the bartering system. It started to take on traction. It was this idea that within the flow of supply and demand and competition therein, there would create this economy of balance and fairness around things like consumption and wages and opportunity and materials and resources. And this idea, otherwise known as capitalism, would reward hard work. It would reward innovation and education, and it could it would be the answer in creating a world where everybody has enough and everybody gets what everybody deserves. And I just oversimplified capitalism to death. So I want to make that point. But what's interesting, here's where it becomes really interesting, is while that idea was being born and taking on energy, there was another thing being born and taking on energy within the religious world during a period of time called the Reformation. And I don't have time to talk about what the Reformation exactly was, but here's what I can tell you that should resonate. Many of the ideas that we grew up with theologically were born in that time frame. The ideas that David spoke to last weekend and some of the things that I've already mentioned were born in that time frame and really started to take on energy. And one idea in particular was that a person's prosperity was directly linked to who was actually in with God and who would actually be headed towards heaven. And again, it's probably a little bit overkill, but I think context is really important in where I'm going this morning. In the 19th century, at the turn of the 19th century, there was a community of social scientists that started to recognize the way these two worlds started to interact. One guy in particular, a guy by the name of Max Weber, who was sort of the ringleader in a lot of this, wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, where he conceptually and historically mapped out how these two worlds, these two ways of thinking started to be interconnected and began to mirror one another. And it was about 100 years ago when this book was written, but it is staggering how relevant it seems to be in reading about it today. If you've ever read James Baldwin, I remember the first time I read James Baldwin, I'm like, did he write this yesterday? Because it feels like he wrote this about what we are going through right now. It's sort of the same experience when you engage this particular work. And I can't obviously summarize the whole book, but there are like these hinge-pinch ideas that surfaced in this type of critique of culture and religion, and they're worth mentioning this morning. So the ideas that started to merge together between these two realities: my wealth indicates closeness to God, which means poverty equals God's rejection. The unequal distribution of resources in this world is a special divine dispensation, which, like grace, is distributed according to God's will. Not only do I have a right to my riches as a blessing of God for my faithfulness and glorifying God through my labor, the poverty of others is not connected to my riches, but is the will of God. Even if the impoverished are poorly paid, they are to work to the glory of God, for this is what pleases God. In effect, the exploitation of workers is permissible by making the capitalistic business not a venture for profit, but a calling from God. Now, again, I told you to buckle your seatbelts, right? There's a whole lot going on here, and you might be asking, all right, but where's this going? What's the point? The point is that there are ways of understanding reality that we are living in the current of in this day and age, that whether we realize it or not. Another way of saying this might be that we all read the Bible from a particular social location. And what I mean by that is we have emerged from, or we live within a menu of beliefs, some which we are fully aware of, some of which we are not, that are defined by the company we keep, our ethnicity, our sexuality, our culture, to name a few, but also our religion, our economy, and our political dispositions and assumptions within those lived experiences. That's how we're showing up in the world, but that's also how we're showing up every time we crack open a book and we're trying to figure out what does it mean to relocate ourselves and read this differently, if that matters to you. Which brings me back to verse 6. Remember, I told you I was going to need you to put a pin in that. Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? There is a way of reading that carries with it a tone of indictment. Out of this particular location, a location that says everybody has an equal starting point and you get what you deserve. And so, why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing? Is very easily the twinge could be, why are you so unmotivated? Why are you so lazy? Why are you so unproductive or incompetent? You're still in this situation. You have done nothing to change the situation. Why don't you just go find work someplace else? You're still poor. Why don't you just find a job that makes more money? And growing up, these were the subversive tones that I read society through, which means I also read the Bible through, a place of power and privilege that is directly correlated to my particular social location. And that's just me. I know nobody here has ever had that experience, right? So I just want to put your mind at ease that right now this is therapy for me. Don't feel the freedom to process or reflect on your own life. I'm sure no one has ever felt that twinge, whether that's reading the Bible or driving past your own local Latrobe and Wendover location. But at the outside chance, because I know it's a long shot, the outside chance that just maybe you and I share something in that, is it possible to read this story differently? And could we imagine showing up as someone other than ourselves? Someone from a different place in the world? Is there a way to identify with someone who is not in charge of the resources or the systems? In fact, someone who is at the mercy of such things. Because there is I would argue, I have no data to prove this, but I'm just spitballing here, that the folks at the corner of Latrobe and Wendover, when they read this story, the last thing they're wondering about, the last question they're asking isn't, wow, how does somebody get to heaven? I think it's possible they're reading this story and they're asking the question, my goodness, in a world where people want to work, why aren't there enough jobs? Why is it that no matter how hard I push, I keep getting behind? Why am I made to feel like I am the problem when I am killing myself to be a part of the solution and my family are paying the price? And I really wanted to expand on that a little bit more, but Miguel is so articulate. We're on a first name basis now. He doesn't know that, but it's a little lengthy, but oh my gosh, it is a tasty morsel, and it's worth hearing. And he writes this: for those who are undocumented and accustomed to stand at designated street corners throughout major cities of this country, waiting and hoping for a patron to stop and offer a job off the books to avoid unemployment taxes, the fairness of this parable resonates. For those who are relegated to the ghettos and barrios, unemployed or limited to minimum wage service jobs, the fairness of this parable provides a vision for a just society based on the rule of God. How many of these migrant workers end up working all day only to be paid a fraction of their worth because they're undocumented? How many times has the employer contacted the INS to show up at the end of the workday to arrest the, quote, illegals and get out of paying them for their work? Or how many of these workers injure themselves at the job only to be dropped off at the closest hospital and left to fend for themselves? To read this parable from the margins, key point there, from the perspective of the poor, is to recognize that the vineyard owner, that is, the employer, has a responsibility towards the laborers, a responsibility that goes beyond the traditional capitalistic thinking defines as just. To read the text materially is to realize Jesus' awareness of the laborer's plight. Poverty is usually defined as a lack of resources, specifically money. Yet poverty's dysfunctions encompass a higher likelihood of failed marriages, a higher susceptibility to illness, a disease, sickness, a greater likelihood of having children who will not complete high school, a higher probability of having children who have difficulties with law enforcement agencies, a greater chance of being a victim of a crime, and a shorter life expectancy. Thank you. Why have you been standing here all day long? When you start to include a voice that is outside of your social location and you exist in the social location that is the norm, that is the place of power and privilege, do you see how a rereading of this question ruins you in all the best ways? It also completely transforms their response, doesn't it? Because no one hired us. Not because we're incompetent. Not because we're undeserving. Not because we're lazy. Which is by the way, a racist trope that's not only from the fusion of capitalism and fundamentalism, but white supremacy. Nope. Why aren't you working? Because no one hired us. No, the system doesn't favor us. It favors the wealthy and the powerful because the system perpetuates a normalcy that's incapable of generating the work. This is how it was always explained to me by my Sunday school teacher. Mrs. Webster would really break open a can on this passage, you know. No, I was never taught to read something like this from that perspective, which makes sense because, and this is probably not new information, but 99% of the world's theology is not generated from the margins, which is ironic since this whole book was written by people from the margins. Instead, it was generated out of this white, Eurocentric, male, straight, Victorian period of time that we often put that up on a pedestal and go, that is literally the way God thinks. Last weekend, David said, man, if you're going to show up to the Bible, you got to realize and get comfortable with, and he held it in his hand. He goes, this thing's a mess. But I would argue it's equally important to recognize that when we show up to this thing, we're a mess. Yeah. We are so messy. We're way more compromised and conditioned by our social location than we have the ability to see or have the capacity to admit. And so in light of this, in light of its influence, are there different ways of arriving to the text that would be worth considering this morning? And this is just a couple. There are way more than this. But the first thing that jumps off the page for me is, what if we stopped searching for answers in the Scriptures and instead search the Scriptures to see our neighbors? What if that was the first thing? What if instead of this sort of lingering need for Bible roulette, do you remember that whole experience, where you would take the Bible and you'd be dying to hear an answer from God about your life? Should I quit the job? Should I go back to school? Should I break up that relationship? And you kind of flip the page and you're like, I'm going to put my finger down and you look down, it's like, Moses tied his ass to a tree and walked 40 miles. I'm just, dear God in heaven. What do I even do with that? That doesn't even... All right, I'm going to try it again. Spin the freaking roulette. Boom. I don't know what to do. Do it a second time, third time. Finally, you get the thing that gives you permission to do what you were going to do anyway. And then you go tell everybody the word of the Lord spoke. And oh my God, this has been such a transformative experience, and it's all BS. It's all BS. That's probably way too harsh there. Jesus spoke as a marginalized person. And he spoke on behalf of his marginalized community to the powers that be. His whole deal was saying, look, the power and the greed and the corruptness, your social location continues to make this whole other group invisible and disposable. And this is not what God had in mind. And if God were really in charge versus allowing us to have so much agency, the world would be different. At one point, he says, the greatest commandment in all this is love your neighbor as yourself. And the second is equal to it is this love of God with all your heart and soul and strength. And it's encoded within the Bible itself is this radical invitation to socially relocate, to see and connect communally and relationally to the world through the life and the perspectives of those who do not share your social location, or more appropriately, the dominant social location. And here's the thing that I think's the kicker at 55 that I'm only, feels like I'm barely grabbing a hold of, but that when you start to see and hear and identify with your neighbors, you don't have to keep looking for God in the Bible. you just stood right in front of God. It's not so much the words of a book, but the experience and the love for and from another person. What if we stop searching for answers, stop searching for God, and instead searched the scriptures in order to see our neighbors? And finally, this is not unique to my community, but growing up in good old Williamstown, Kentucky, which my son insists I say incorrectly. It's not Williamstown, it's Williamstown. That's a whole point of contention. But we used to say, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy, because I grew up in the country. In other words, old habits die hard. There's neural pathways that have been formed throughout our entire lifetime from this particular social location in which we have existed. And you don't reprogram things that have happened over a lifetime overnight. Because you can intellectually be in a place, and stored in your body are still those dispositions through guilt and shame and fear. Some of you are still ashamed that you show up to this church every weekend. My parents, they're glad I'm in church, but I don't know if they're so glad that it's this church. And I've mentioned this value of reading the Bible from the margins, and I think doing this, moving into that space, is both effortful and intentional in the deprogramming, the decolonization process in the way we read the Bible. Our teaching team has made a concerted effort to try to do this over the past 3 or 4 years. Black, brown, Asian, indigenous, queer thinkers like Jackie Lewis, Austin Channing Brown, Peter Choi, Bell Hooks, Robin Henderson Espinoza, Kevin Garcia, Miguel, Gustavo Gutierrez, Caitlin Curtis. These are just a few thinkers, spiritual, theological thought leaders who are not only on the margins of culture and society, but on the margins of the normative theological world and the political world, who have been monumental in helping us interrogate who we are, our own social locations, as well as introducing different perspectives beyond Watershed's historical normal. Another way of saying this is diversity freaking can save you from yourself. Diversity can... That still just doesn't feel normal to me. I can't name this point strongly enough, but it's not just about including a diversity of thought or academia, but about relationship and community, like flesh and blood. Because to be able to practice this out of some sort of togetherness across a spectrum of variance here at Watershed, that disrupts your status quo. It sets you in this place of dissonance outside of yourself, and in so doing, creates the potential to be liberated. That is a lived experience, not just for myself, but for this community. It's the potential to be liberated from our places of certainty, our addiction to power and complicity, and into a way of loving as though a different world is possible today. See what I did there? For those of you who are new, our kind of mantra or mission here is Watershed as a community, awakening, struggling, and loving as though a different world is possible today. And so Watershed as a community, as a group of friends and relatives and journeyers, as saints and sinners, for those who continue to place importance on the scriptures, may the doubt around our past religious understanding and experiences be a call into the project of relocation. May we embrace the idea of a God who would say it's time to move on to something else. Not so much time to move on away from God or even away from the scriptures, but away from its use as a weapon or a way of securing security or certainty and power, and towards a way of being that loves our neighbors well, invites us into the pursuit of justice, and calls us to love radically a world that is in desperate need of such things. Amen. And thank you for my rant, or thank you for allowing me to rant this morning.
I want to invite you to stand as we close this morning. We're going to sing a song that we've done a lot over the years, but we haven't done it in a while. And so I want to sing kind of this tag and teach it to you a little bit, and we'll come back to it later in the song. But it speaks to this unknown God, this God that we can't know, this God that is bigger than our words, bigger than our ideas. So this chorus goes like this. Come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight, bring this world to light. Come like rain, like breath, like springtime, bring this world to life. Let's sing it again. Come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight, bring this world to life. Come like rain, like breath, like springtime, bring this world to life.
Oh, the vapor of it all. It's a chasing of the wind, the powers of the earth, so pale and thin. We will set our hearts on you again. Heaven taunts the hearts of men. We can feel it from within, the beauty of it all, the mystery, swelling of a voice, a rising sea. Sing holy, holy. You, O God, are holy. Trees clap their hands for you. Oceans, they dance for you. And you are holy. Oh, the mystery of it all. I can never peer within, could never find the words or understand the fullness of a God become a man. Holy, you, O God, are holy. Trees clap their hands for you. Oceans, they dance for you. And you are holy. Infinite and holy. The billion suns rise for you. Clouds meet the skies for you. Mountains stand tall for you.
impossible and holy. Kings become foes for you, kingdoms to ruins for you. Vapor finds ground in you, music finds sound for you. And kings become fools for you, kingdoms to ruins for you. Vapor finds ground in you, music finds sound for you. Everything rising, everything rising, everything rising. Oh, come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight. Bring this world to life. Come like rain, like breath, like springtime. Bring this world to life. Come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight. Bring this world to life. Come like rain, like breath, like springtime. Bring this world to Come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight. Bring this world to life. Come like rain, like breath, like springtime. Bring this world to life. Come like dawn, come like dawn, like waves, like sunlight. Bring this world to life. Come like rain, come like rain, like breath, like springtime. Bring this world to life. Thank you so much for singing with us this morning, for joining us. Let that be our prayer as we go this morning. We'll see you next Sunday. Thank you.